Rodney Orr. Good afternoon, sir. I hope you're doing well. Welcome into the game in T-Town.
I am doing great, Ryan. How are you?
That's good. Just watching it rain in Tuscaloosa, but it's March the 1st. And,
Yep.
You know, you and I used to have a mutual pastor that used to remind us that once you get a little older, that time flies. That as you get older, and it feels like we just turned 2018 just a couple of days ago, and we're already entering the third month here. We're two in the book.
Yeah, it is amazing. There's no question. I think the last 8 weeks have flown by, obviously, and now here we are, Ryan. We're headed right into spring practice. I mean, it's just like you said, it's 19 days away, and we're starting anew.
Yeah, and obviously the conversation about repeating, and this week the NFL Combine. I want to tie you into that. I'm going to go into spring practice as well. You've got 14 players at the NFL Combine representing the University of Alabama, more than any other college program in the country. Alabama's got 14 guys this week in Indiana that will be drafted at some capacity, some way. That is a huge value to recruiting, and I know you do both. You cover the team and recruiting, but the value of seeing players leave the University of Alabama and go into the NFL is huge for recruiting.
Yeah. Well, I think the number one thing when you talk about high school recruits, high school prospects these days, Ryan, they all want to play on the next level. I'm talking about the NFL. They all have those visions and those dreams, and, rightfully so. I mean, that's part of it. If you're a player, most of your ambition is you want to make it to the highest level. And when you see a school that has such a track record for developing players, preparing them, putting them in positions, getting them the exposure that Alabama does, the success that they've had doing that, certainly it's extremely helpful, and it's not slowing down. Let's be clear. It's not slowing down. That's one thing that Alabama's having to fight on the recruiting trail, Ryan, is that, that the train is slowing down a little bit. I think there's some people in the Southeastern Conference, to be honest with you, some other head coaches that would like to be able to convince people of that, but they can't. I mean, you just mentioned the fact right there. There's 14 of them that are going to be in this combine. They're going to continue to produce this kind of talent. They've still recruited extremely well, and it's not slowing down.
Rodney, how do you argue with the success? I mean, if some of these coaches go in the living room and try to convince these players, Alabama's almost got a complete roster in the NFL. There's only 32 teams in the NFL, 53 players on a roster. Alabama almost has a complete roster in the NFL. I mean, how do you argue that? I mean, you look like a fool if you're sitting in a living room trying to convince them that they don't do it.
Well, I think the thing is they're saying Nick Saban's slowing down. He's losing it. He'll only be here a couple of more years. Those types of things. Those are the kind of things that we heard when Bryant was here, Coach Bryant, obviously, and in the latter part of his career. I don't see Nick Saban slowing down. Ryan, I go back to, again, I said this, and I probably said this on your show once before. In early December, I did a little piece about it. I felt like Alabama was at a crossroads. Sometimes when you're at a crossroads and you have to evaluate things, reevaluate your program and all of those things, you can kind of judge where a coach is by, does he sit still or does he move forward? And it wasn't that Alabama was falling apart by any means, but you did see that Nick Saban had some areas where maybe changes had to be made, or maybe some moves had to be made. Nick Saban hasn't sat still. I mean, he's made several changes on the coaching staff, and again, it's not slowing down. He's not sitting still, and I think these moves certainly prove that.
Yeah, if you think Nick Saban's slowing down, we'll invite those to be inside that press room on that Tuesday when the questions start arriving about quarterbacks, right? Because somebody's going to ask it, and we're going to watch Nick Saban explode on the first day of spring, right? I mean, we can go ahead and predict that.
Well, I really think probably what will happen is, and he does this extremely well as anyone I've ever seen, is he'll address it on his own, and he'll make sure that everyone knows that I know nothing else. I have nothing else to say on it. So if you ask me, you're just kind of wasting your time because there's nothing else to say. He does that very, very well. He'll probably address it in his opening remarks. I'll be surprised if he doesn't.
But it will obviously come up. Rodney, other than the quarterback competition, What else are you focused in on? Maybe like not ranking the competitions, but maybe a couple things and a couple of players that are fighting for key spots that will grab your attention in the early part of spring as we work our way to April the 21st.
Well, first of all, they've got some really good running backs. I'm not really concerned about that because all those guys are going to play. You look on the offensive line, I think that there are some. It'd be interesting. First of all, I wouldn't get too caught up on where all these guys are positioned initially. I think they're going to do as they always do. They'll work several combinations up front. A guy like Alex Leatherwood at left tackle did a fantastic job when Jonah Williams was injured in the championship game. It might be interesting. Let's see if Jonah Williams is maybe tried or given a look at center or maybe an interior position. I think Jedrick Wills at right tackle, mentioned Leatherwood. Who knows? Is Matt Womack possibly going to get a look inside at guard with Jedrick Wills at right tackle? I think all of those combinations will probably be looked at. I think we know about all the young talent at wide receiver. I do want to see the other freshman that was redshirted, Terrell Shavers, to see how he looks. I think there's he was a true freshman tight end last year, Kedrick James, who I think is going to be a star someday. I think he's going to be an interesting guy to watch. Defense, there's Fedarian Mathis is a young defensive lineman. It's going to be really interesting to watch Coach Kulagowski and how he kind of develops these guys up front defensively. Obviously, you've got some spots to fill at linebacker. Sean Deion Hamilton's gone. Rashawn Evans is gone. Dylan Moses should be back. Be interesting to see who's running inside with Dylan. Obviously, Mac Wilson's. I think he's going to be a fantastic player. And in the secondary, they've got to retool the whole thing. I mean, you've lost several of those guys. Obviously, both safeties, both corners, Tony Brown. Savion Smith is a guy that I'd really keep my eye on at cornerback. Trevon Diggs, Deontay Thompson looked great, I thought, down the stretch last season, given his lack of experience. Thought he did a fantastic job. Daniel Wright was a true freshman that played some. Xavier McKinney was another true freshman that played some. Kareem McDonald is a guy that I think I'd keep an eye on in secondary. And there are others. Obviously, Shaheem Carter was in for Tony Brown in the overtime against Georgia. So those are just some of the names, but I think all of those positions will be interesting to watch.
We're talking to Rodney Orr, TighterInsider.com, as we gear up for spring football right here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Rodney, let me go back to that left tackle spot for just a minute. Jonah Williams, with a recent publication that I'm going to ask you about, is listed as one of the top 35 players in all of college football. He's on a top 50 list, but he's about number 35. But Alex Leatherwood, the way that he came in, I think it grabbed a lot of people's attention. I'm sure it did of yours as well. The players, the fans, of the way he came in and didn't miss a beat, and at times looked maybe a little bit more comfortable there at that left tackle spot.
Yeah, he looked great. I mean, we talk about how well Tua played, and we can't say enough about that because it was an off-the-charts performance, no question. But Alex Leatherwood, given his limited experience coming in that situation, I'll never forget when Jonah was taken off the field or walked off the field gingerly. I thought, maybe this just isn't Alabama's night because now you're going to have to replace him with a true freshman. Never would have dreamed that Alex Leatherwood would have been, and again, I'm sure he made some mistakes, but he did an incredible job. Yeah, I really like him. I think it gives you some flexibility with Jonah Williams now. Jonah's a really smart kid, aside from being a great player. He understands the game, understands all those positions up front. So you can try him at another spot. Obviously, he was very good as a true freshman at right tackle. So, that gives you some flexibility to try Jonah at another spot.
We're talking to Rodney Orr, TighterInsider.com. Rodney, let me go to the center position. Can you give me a few names that you think, because that guy is going to be awfully responsible to replace Big Bradley Bozeman?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard that there's a possibility, like I said, that Jonah may get a look
Sure.
at center. That will be interesting. Ross Pierce-Baker, you remember a couple of years ago, up until the week to 10 days before the opener, I think it was against USC, that Ross Pierce-Baker was penciled in as a starter before they slid Bradley Bozeman in there at center. So maybe you try Pierce-Baker there some. Chris Owens is a guy that's been around now. I think he'll be a redshirt sophomore out of Texas. He's a guy that's played some at center and, practices for sure. Brandon Kennedy is also a guy that's been around. So I think all of those guys maybe get some looks there at the center spot. We'll see what happens.
Rodney, the list that we wanted to ask you about is top 50 athlonsports.com, and we like these type of conversations because it creates some dialogue between, just looking at players, giving them recognition. Raekwon Davis at 34, Jonah Williams at 35, then you've got Tua Tagovailoa at 27, and then Dylan Moses just barely missed the cut outside of the top 50. Give me a couple of players that you think we're talking about after the season that may be one of the top 50 players in college football from the University of Alabama.
Yeah. Ryan, I have a hard time doing that too, but Alex Leatherwood, certainly, I think,
okay.
That would be an interesting thing, one to watch, I think. I don't know on the defensive line. Obviously, they've got a lot of guys, Terrell Lewis, Bugs, who I think's got that potential. Anthony Jennings, until he went down, you saw that. Dylan Moses inside at linebacker. I love Mac Wilson. Again, I told you it was hard to name a couple. They've got too many good players, Ryan.
Sure.
I mean, they really do. I mean, these are guys that some of them, Jerry Jeudy. I mean, I think this guy's in the Ridley, Amari Cooper, potentially those types of guys. So they've got really so many guys. Like I said, Deontay Thompson looked good. I know Savion Smith has never played it down, but he was a 5-star player who's at LSU and then came here, and I know that there was a lot of buzz during the practice for the bowl games about him at corner. So, I mean, it's hard to name a couple, Ryan, but those are some really, really good players. I don't know if all top 50 or whatever, but they're good.
Well, you look at a guy like Dylan Moses. Is he that next great Alabama linebacker? Certainly Mac Wilson and that competition there. But you look at Dylan Moses, he may take the reins of that next super Alabama linebacker that we've come to expect under Nick Saban.
Mm-hmm. No question. Look at all the big plays he's made. I mean, he's made tremendous amount of big plays. Physical. He intercepted the pass against Clemson, returned it for a touchdown. I mean, he's had so many big plays. I agree with you, Ryan. He could certainly be a guy that's the next great one. And, they've got guys like, just to give you an example, Chris Allen, who's got all the potential and the talent in the world as an outside backer that nobody even really knows about yet out of Baton Rouge that'll be a sophomore. So, they've got a lot of guys that I think can be great players.
And the most fun I always have every year, it's amazing from the last time we see these guys, most of the time a national championship game, and then the first day that we see them in spring practice, I always enjoy watching what Scott Cochran has been able to do with transforming body shapes. And that's always the fun part because it's like 2 months, and look at where they have added some pounds, some bulk, and transformed their body size and shape. Yeah,
that's a big part of it. I mean, he does such a tremendous job with these guys, developing them physically, preparing them to get ready to play, and you see a big jump between these guys when they come in as freshmen. Although I will say this last class they brought in most every class, actually, when you looked at them physically, I mean, they look like some schools' veteran players. I mean, coming in, they're already, got the incredible genetics almost, if you want to put it that way. And they look good, but what Cochran does with them is just take them to another level. And I'll say this, too. You talking about players, I'll tell you one to watch, Brian. A lot of people talking about the defensive line, young redshirt freshman. I'll be interested to see Fedarian Mathis this spring. He redshirted on the defensive line. I think he's going to be an outstanding player. Keep your ears out for him. And also remember, if LeBron Ray hadn't have gotten hurt last year, he was getting better and better. So there's another defensive lineman that I think is going to be a really good player and a household name in this state.
Rodney, let's go back to LeBron Ray, and I wasn't going to extend the interview, but you brought him up. The athletic ability that he showed, that because of the injuries, they looked at him as an outside backer. That just tells you the athletic ability. They're probably going to try to use him with his hand on the ground, but if they've got the athletic ability to play an outside linebacker, can you imagine this guy when we get to see the year in the program and see the impact he's going to make?
Yeah, I really like LeBron Ray out of Madison, James Clemens, and he is like you said, Ryan, he's got the great frame, the height and all that stuff. He's quick. I mean, we saw him come in the Texas A&M game. That might have been the first game he played in or one of the first games, but, he made some plays in that game very early, in his playing time. They thought about redshirting him last year, but, and they ended up playing him. So, and again, I mentioned him, but also I want to be clear. Hey, Darian Mathis is a name to really watch out for.